Yes, I'm ready. Is it echoing?
Yeah, it is echoing a little bit.
Okay.
It
But it's
probably
like
won't.
hit and miss. 1 minute it's fine, 1 minute it's echoing just a little bit. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
GarageBand will probably record just your voice anyway. And that's what we'll
Yeah,
use for
and
the editing.
exactly. And we'll just, she can fix it in post. She's my audio ninja. Thank you, podcast wife.
How
Okay,
bad
so
is he
go ahead and get
echoing? Okay.
we are live.
Hello and welcome to Literary Roadhouse Discussions, where we talk to authors and other literary figures. Today we're having a discussion with Karan Bajaj, the #1 best-selling Indian novelist. Karan's first worldwide novel, The Yoga of Max's Discontent, will be published by Random House on May 3rd, 2016. The book is about a Wall Street investment banker who becomes a yogi in the Himalayas and through adventure discovers the hidden underbelly of India. The Daily Telegraph calls it the greatest adventure of our generation. Also joining us is Literary Roadhouse's very own and irreplaceable Maya Good. Hi, guys.
Hi. How are you doing, Karan?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
I'm really glad to have you. When you contacted us, I thought your story was really interesting. And I think that we're going to be able to have a really good discussion today. One of the things that really struck me as I did a little bit of research and I looked at your previous novels and your other interviews was that a lot of your books focus on a protagonist that's really going through a spiritual hero's journey. And I was just curious, a lot of times when you see the same things repeating through someone's work, there's a lot of depth there. So I'm wondering about your own personal hero's journey. Can you tell us a little bit about, what it is that you're trying to say with your work?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. Is it echoing? Is the voice echoing?
It is a little bit.
I'm also sorry. Well, hello.
Yeah, we'll deal with it.
Still echoing. It's very hard to talk because I can hear the echo.
Okay, I have a question. When you take off your headphones and I say something, can you hear us? Take off your headphones, cover them up. Okay, so now I'm talking. Can you hear us?
Vaguely. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So what I want you to do is to go into your system settings with the sprocket and make sure only one of your microphones is turned on. You might actually be coming through two microphones.
Okay.
Savila, thank you very much for bringing that up.
Ryan Perez. Hi.
Yeah, Ryan's awesome. That was a good tip.
Is this bad? No, it's still resolved.
Do you have Blab open twice? That happened to be once where I had another tab or another browser.
Oh, good call. That does happen sometimes.
Yeah. Is this better?
Yes.
Oh, it is way better. It's way better.
Thank
Yes.
you for being my other brain. I love you. I would give something, but your fiance might get upset.
That was brilliant. Wonderful. Okay, it's all good now, finally. Yes.
Okay, so start with where you left off.
Yes, I think it's a great question. What I've seen unconsciously, because I never sat out to write like 3 novels in the same hero's quest kind of a way. But what I've seen is that my own quest has gone from being very external to become very internal. And I think the novels have reflected that. So I think they're all men on a quest trying to find meaning first in the world outside them. And then I think they've gone to becoming more about the world inside them, if you will. Yeah.
And that's something you've done personally as well.
Yes, and it happened automatically almost when I think of, so I'm on this like weird 4-1-4 kind of a rule is how I think of it now over the last decade or so, in which I work for 4 years, then I take a year off, then I work for 4 years, take a year off, work for 4 years, take a year off. So I've done like about 3 of these cycles, and I think of them how dramatically they've transformed. If I think of the first sabbatical, that was completely traveling. I traveled in Central Asia, I traveled in South America. I did everything that I wanted to do from a travel perspective. But then I think of the last sabbatical, 6 or 7 months were spent in an ashram in the Himalayas doing yoga and meditation, like completely in the confines of like a 1 mile radius for 6 months. And then 4 months was spent in a village in Portugal, where again, I was very like secluded, isolated. So it's gone from kind of being out in the world to becoming very internal, and both the external, I guess, environment has reflected that.
Yeah, and that definitely is showing up in your work for sure.
Yes. I think you see in the third novel, it's a very internal quest. Now, again, I have a like a storyteller's instinct to make it exciting, like it does. Like so, that was the challenge, I think, for this novel, is how do you make a very internal quest very exciting to read about versus becoming a PhD thesis or something like that, right? But you're absolutely correct. They're all men on a quest. I think I'm done with that phase of writing in a way. I think I just hit 35, 36. I think 3 of those novels were me trying to figure my place out in the world. Now I'm married with 2 kids, and I think I'm going to write something dramatically different next time.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think you have as an advantage as far as being able to write an internal quest in an exciting way is your first books were contemporary fiction. I mean, they were published in India, but they were classified as contemporary fiction. And so you're writing this literary internal quest, but you have a lot of these genre skills that you can bring into your literary fiction.
Yes, very good point. I think that's absolutely true. Although the other thing is, though, that I've always kind of distilled down my writing even before I start. And sometimes I start with outline, sometimes without. But I'm always thinking of 2 things right at the onset. Is there entertainment and is there meaning? Like if I can crack those combination of entertainment and meaning, then I know I'll end up writing a good novel. So I'm very clear right at the beginning, what is that one question that I'm trying to answer, which is my meaning question, if you will. And then how can I in 1 or 2 sentences figure out what's entertaining about this novel? So I think in this novel, for instance, right at the onset, I knew that the meaning question was, at least in my head, very profound. Like I really wanted to figure out, what does enlightenment mean? What does it feel like? What is the complete dissolution of the self feel like? Which is a heavyish kind of question, trying to figure that out. And what is the nature of suffering? Why does it exist? And then in the entertainment, I kind of like set it out right at the beginning that it's going to be a journey through hidden secret India. And I don't know, like that kind of like clarity right at the beginning helps me plan both of them together. And I think I've done it for each of my novels. Just identified those 2 things right at the onset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then how do you end up choosing sort of the character? So the character of Max struck me as very specific, right? So he grew up in the Bronx. He went on to work on Wall Street. I was wondering what your experience was like with that and how you came up with that plot. Yeah,
it's an excellent question. I think this one was emotionally autobiographical in a sense. I think the questions that I was asking are obviously questions that I have raised myself. But what I realized during the course of writing it a little was that the reason I asked questions on why does suffering happen, why is it, they were very important to me because I think I grew up in India, and in India, those questions are always top of your mind because in a way, like even if you're living in a middle-class family like me, if you're going to your school, which could be a 10-minute walk from your house to a place, during that 10-minute walk, you are probably going to see very extreme forms of suffering in front of you. You'll see like a beggar without legs and hands. You'll see, like children who have you can just say have no future at all because so you see very extreme forms of suffering every moment and you're never insulated from it. And I think in the US, I started to realize that in order for that character to ask questions like that, he has to have a very visceral connection with suffering, not an intellectual connection, but a very experiential connection. So then I had to place him in an environment like that. Otherwise, if I think of my own life in Brooklyn right now, I mean, I'm not going to the Bronx. Like it's just like I can go days without like asking myself those questions because it's not a part of my everyday reality. So that's why I kind of based him in the Bronx and the housing projects because I wanted someone who had experienced mortality and suffering and death in a very experiential way right from the beginning, Yeah.
That's wonderful. As you're talking, I'm thinking about previously, I've heard you say that in order to write better, you need to live more, and that's where your 4-1 concept came from.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how much, I mean, obviously your upbringing in India is really influencing your fiction. And it influences the questions you're asking with your fiction. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, now that you feel like you've answered that question with this book, how do you see your purpose as a writer? Like, what is it that you're trying to say with your writing going forward?
Yeah, and the interesting thing there is, Maya, is that for me, the most liberating idea in all of this is that I'm not a I've deliberately chosen, despite some success, and success is a relative term, but despite some success and monetary success as well with my writing, I've very consciously chosen never to become a full-time writer, or never to choose the path of relying on writing as a monetary stream at all. And part of the reason I made that choice is because I almost don't want to think of my path as a writer. I'm kind of more thinking of my path as a person, and I'm hoping that the expression for that will be like capturing those experiences with my writing. And I think that's what I think of. So I don't even think in terms of my next novel. I'm actually right now currently what we are planning a little bit is that in 18 months time, we'll be out for a year again. And with 2 kids, what does that mean? We'll be spending 4 months in an orphanage in Cambodia. We really want to kind of work with our hands and have our kids work with their hands. And then we want to spend 4 months in Spain learning, having a project as a family to learn Spanish and the guitar together. So I'm just kind of thinking in those terms. And I think as a result of that, some expression will come through writing in context of a story. And I'm going to write that. But I have no burden at all to write a book. So that's very liberating, honestly. It's always been very liberating for me,
That's really profound, because I mean, my goal is to become a full-time writer, but I know that as a full-time writer, it is so easy to isolate yourself from the world.
Correct.
And if you are isolated from the world, you can't really write of it. And so I'm taking a very purposeful movement to travel and live as a nomad, specifically so that I don't hole myself up in an apartment somewhere and start churning out boring books that I'm not proud of.
Yes.
And hearing your story and how you've integrated that part into your writing was what interested me particular about having you on the show. Anish, you look at me, you're looking like you have a question.
Well, so I was
read
wondering,
her mind. We've been podcasting together for a long time.
Yeah, we have telepathy. So what I was wondering is, in your email, you had mentioned something about how going through the process of spiritual enlightenment also changed the way that you write and your approach to writing. And I wanted to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, in many ways, what's happened is that I think there's a beautiful concept in Sanskrit called dharma, which is a beautiful concept. Like dharma really means that every being has a tendency of a sort. Like, for example, the tendency of a tree is to just grow and bear fruit. Like, it doesn't become a river. It's just the tendency to be, that's just the innate tendency of it. And similarly, I think human beings have a certain tendency. And what I've seen with myself is that my tendency is very analytical, left brain, logical, outline driven in my writing. It just comes very naturally to me. I think what's happened with me is that my spiritual discipline, or whatever you call it, meditation and yoga and stuff, has made me very comfortable with intuitive, just being more intuitive in my decision making. And part of it is also in this 1 year off, I'm kind of consciously training myself to be intuitive by both in a physical form. My wife and I choose not to decide anything at all. When we go from Europe to India by road, our plan is that every day has to be a new day and every decision has to be spontaneous and what it feels like, and never plan anything, because again, I tend to plan too much. So it's very good for me to, and then I think the meditation and stuff is very helpful because it makes me much more intuitive. It makes me very comfortable with silence, which is also very important for me because I have a tendency, once again, to want to become too much. I like to read a lot, listen to a lot of podcasts and blogs, and I'm wanting to become better all the time. And I think what happens as a result of that is that your opinions you just regurgitate the opinions of the world after a while because you're consuming so much information. So I think with this spiritual discipline, I think you just learn to be happy, silent. And I think that leads to a lot of originality, at least in my opinion, because because I'm not like reading constantly all the time or getting information all the time. So in this year that I take off, I actually read 1 or 2 books again and again. So for the whole year, I don't have that urge to gather more information. So I think there's something that happens in which I'm silenced a lot. A lot of my creation is original in what if original for me, whether it's original objectively or not is not the point, but it's very original for me because it's not coming from a place of noise.
Yeah.
You said you read 1 or 2 books. I'm curious which ones.
Typically, I would say it's perennial literature is how I think of it. Perennial in the sense it's never like these 4 life hacks or 5 ways to improve your morning and whatever, like, or even contemporary fiction. It's more like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I would read that again and again, or the Buddha's biography. Those were the 2 books in the last sabbatical. Karan Armstrong wrote a biography of the Buddha, which I just kept reading again and again because I was just kind of like trying to envision his life at that time. And I don't know, they're very silent moments, which I really, I've become also very comfortable with, like in the sabbatical. And that's why it's very important that the monetary aspect I don't think about. In the sabbatical, there are days, hours that I spend thinking about why was the world created? What is the meaning of the creating energy? I don't think about these things here. Like right now, I'm just thinking of hacking my novel over there. Like, I'm just thinking of very practical things. So I like this idea that I'm, in a year, I'm I'm allowing myself that indulgence to be contemplating,
Yeah. I've actually considered spending some time in a monastery when I get to Brazil. Yeah. And I'm wondering for you, do you integrate your meditation practice into your writing? Do you meditate before you start writing for the day, or is there anything else that is specific to your meditation that you've found helps your writing?
Yeah. So again, in this 414 model, a little bit, the 4 years that I'm working, I'm actually quite good in my spiritual discipline rigor, if you will. Like I do meditate in the morning and in the night, and overall, when I first started meditating, I did more like a concentration-based kind of meditation in which I learned to concentrate on an external object, like the breath. And I think that gave me a lot of discipline of single-mindedness. And over a period of time, what I think is it's evolved a little bit to more like an insight-based approach in which I'm just aware. Like what happens right now is that there is a little bit of a nanosecond delay between my action and reaction. So if something is frustrating me, irritating me, my immediate reaction is not to get irritated, is not to get angry. It's to just have a little bit of just a small delay in which I just note that I'm feeling irritated, in which case my reaction is never as extreme. I think that allows a lot more space in my life because I'm not constantly acting, reacting. So that happens in these 3-4 years, but it's never very deep. It's a limited spiritual practice which allows limited benefits, like improved concentration. But in that year that I'm off, it's beautiful in a way that I don't put the burden to write at all. So there are days that go by in which I'm not writing at all. And I'm very immersed in my whatever I'm doing, which is yoga or meditation or like reading the 1 or 2 books or traveling without. So there's no burden to be on any schedule at all. I think they're wonderful moments because then what happens is that when I'm writing, I really want to write.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
There's a lot of purity in what I'm writing because I'm coming from a period of just not thinking about my book in a very tight way. I'm I'm experiencing life in a lot of presence, and I think that shows in the writing. So something like that is very good, that I have the discipline, but then I also have this complete lack of discipline, and those two balance each other out. If I was constantly disciplined, I don't think I would write very like I would end up writing somewhat mediocre stuff, I think,
Yeah.
So I think it's important to slacken completely. Yeah.
Have you always written, or did something spark that first time?
No, I think that's the part of that's how I started actually the 414 thing, because I took the first sabbatical. Till then I had never written a word, not even written a story in high school or whatever. Or maybe I'd probably written one story somewhere, which was rejected by everyone. I don't know. There's no history. So for the first 28 years of my life, there is almost no spark. And then I went on this, year off in which I lived in Mongolia, places that I always wanted to live in. And then I started to write. And then it did very well in India because it was very contemporary in a way, because all the Indian writing up till that point was Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, very literary people who were writing about very literary kind of, this backwaters in Kerala and this magic experiences and then I started to write about escaping the constraints of society, drugs, sex, very youngish stuff that time, and that's why it suddenly kind of caught on in India because so many people were trying to break free from the shackles, and it was very contemporary for India at that point. But yeah, anyway, so I just started writing things that were happening to me, which turned out to be a little bit of a success model for me on multiple levels. I was like, I should just write whatever I'm feeling very deeply, and it'll find an audience. And then I started to also realize that suddenly having this space for a year in which I wasn't trying to become anybody allowed me to explore a facet of myself that I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
So I think that was very liberating because then I think in the subsequent years, I did that again and again with that space in which I didn't identify myself as a writer. As you were asking me 2 years later, when we go on a sabbatical, the space is going to be more there's no identity that I'm wanting to be a better writer in that year. I think it just happened as a result of living life.
Just living authentically.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very important.
Right. I think that's good. And that's why it's been very important for me to not rely on this to just have those leap. I think in the US, what I've noticed is that people want to become, there's always a becoming, the stories that we admire are that I was a lawyer, I quit and I became a life purpose coach. So people really admire those stories because they are like, oh, you went from point A to point B. I really think there is a lot of merit in going from point A to nothing and coming back to point A. There has to be some model in which you are like, I'm a lawyer and then for a year I have no identity at all. It's not to be a writer or life purpose coach or whatever. I'm nothing at all. And then with this idea that I might come back to law, so you're not taking those drastic moves all the time and not trying to always become somebody different, and you're just trying to be I don't know, there's some power in that. So when I go for a sabbatical, part of me is always like, I'll come back to the job. So I have no burden to reinvent myself.
Yeah, I think there's some real emotional health in what you said, because I think a lot of people, like you said, they're one thing and they have this view that if they achieve something different, then everything will be better. And then they get there and they're dissatisfied.
Yes.
And because they've built up this idea of what that thing is. And I think, recognizing that us as humans is much more fluid is really important. And that's something that you're able to teach through fiction in a way that people can digest it on almost a subconscious level versus writing a nonfiction book. And then people are dissecting it logically. And then they're saying, well, I need to achieve this idea of not achieving. Because that's what happens.
Yes.
And it's
no, true.
Hearing you say that, it makes me think you were talking about how one of the challenges with this book was that your message is very internal and you need an external story to keep it interesting. And now when you're talking about how some people say, oh, they want to go from point A to point B, they want to accomplish that. In many cases, it's an external story, right? It's almost like a performance. It's like, I went from point A to point B. But if you go from A to 0, like you said, then back to A, it's more of an internal thing. It's about your own fulfillment, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's why I'm a fan of that kind of an approach
Yeah. And then you were talking about how during sabbatical, you read 1 or 2 books over and over. But then when you're not on a sabbatical and it's your noisy period, what's the kind of fiction that you like to read?
Yeah, that's, I read a lot during this noisy period, if you will. I just, I consume everything from The Girl on the Train to All the Light We Cannot See, everything that's, I read this beautiful Vietnamese detective thriller. What is it? The Girl, I don't know. I was just reading something last night.
When you figure it out, let me know. Because it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's some Vietnamese detective story and stuff. So I read a very varied range of commercial and literary fiction. But again, I think I'm very pulled to stories which are page turning. I don't know. I think that's very important to me because it's just in my tradition. I think if I continue writing, I'll always write something that crackles the page a lot. So
something that pulls you to keep turning the page.
Yeah, because you then any time I detect the presence of an author in writing, and that happened to me in The Goldfinch, I think that I was enjoying it, and then it really became very like it felt like the author was trying to communicate some message. And the moment you start detecting the presence of an author, I think the whole fictive dream breaks completely. And then you just don't. So that's why I like this. I like the idea of the fictive dream so much, that the story is the message, and the author is not trying to distill his thoughts into, like, is not trying to distill his voice into the character's voice, So,
yeah, I think we recently ran into that on the Literary Roadhouse Book Club when we were talking about the Fates and Furies.
I was thinking the same thing.
Same thing.
You were thinking the same thing.
I had the same experience.
We all loved that book, and then there were points that it just yanked us out. And it was, as you said, those were the points that the pace changed and you could hear the author.
Right.
And I like the fact that you're writing literary fiction, but you're using this almost suspense pacing to keep the reader truly interested. And I'm hoping that comes back. I know that, that used to be a lot more common as, in literary fiction. But now it has been for at least a couple decades that people write literary fiction instead of just writing a book and then it ends up being literary fiction. I have to ask you, if you were talking to a new writer, and they said, I want to write literary fiction, but I want it to be fun and interesting, what would you give them for advice?
I think the biggest advice is what we already talked about, which is to live a big, interesting life, to write a big, interesting story. That, or at least in my tradition, or that works for my writing. Because without living that big, interesting life, I don't even know what to. Then you'll write about the postmodern angst of being in New York. I mean, I don't know, like just some of the novels I read a little bit, I'm like they seem very. I guess almost they're literary fiction, but they almost seem very small in their execution because I feel like the author has led a very small life almost. So I feel like, live a big, interesting life. And I think like stories come from that. Like if you decide to go from Europe to India by road without a plan, honestly, if you truly commit to that no day at all you'll plan anything, I can guarantee you'll have a story at the end of it. With both, it'll be very entertaining because there's some adventure in that, and then you'll see yourself transform as a person, answer some of the questions because of the space you've created, and I think a great book will come as a result versus, I don't know, a more traditional
sitting around
and thinking
postmodern angst.
Yeah, because I think a lot of that stuff is very, I don't know. Yeah. Same with after Fates and Furies also, I felt like in the beginning it was a little, and I shouldn't criticize other books. That's not the point. But I feel like, something gets lost when that's what in fiction, I feel like that idea that the character has a very lofty, unattainable goal. That makes me very excited about fiction, when the character has this very lofty, unattainable goal that they're going all towards to find, and then they keep falling and stumbling to get towards that goal. Even if they don't get the goal, it's such an interesting story and an interesting life if you live your life the same way. When the goal is too small, I don't know, figuring life out in New York or whatever, it's just too small. And then, so then it becomes less interesting as a story. So I think that's my single advice or whatever it's worth. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that you've highlighted is the idea of knowing your audience. I mean, we do criticize other books because that's what we do on our show. That's like the point of our podcast. We sit around criticizing books and stories, and then we pick out what we like and what we don't like, and we learn from it. And I know that when we read Fates and Furies, those of us that loved the first half of the book didn't like the second half. And those of us that loved the second half didn't like the first half. And it was almost like the book was written for two different audiences and smushed together. And one of the things that you're talking about, you're very consistent in how you talk about the literature that you're writing and the literature that you enjoy reading. And I think that's something that we can all take away from that, both as readers and writers. It's okay if there's a certain type of writing that you enjoy, go with it. And it's okay if there's a certain type of writing that you enjoy writing, just go with it. Agreed.
Because the burden is not, as you deepen as a person, your writing will deepen. So there's no hurry to get, I think there's too much against maybe it's a US thing, or people have too much of a hurry to get somewhere, I think. And I think it's okay. If I think of my first novel, 2008, I mean, it's really basic. Like it's like I won't even call it contemporary fiction because that would make it sound bigger than it is. It's just it's like a very tripped out story of a guy who's experiencing life, which like, and that's why I never, after the success in India, I had Harper and then Penguin wanting to publish it in the US. And you can imagine the temptation for a guy who had never written a book. Now suddenly, like, Europe wants to publish it, US wants to publish it, and then took so much self-discipline to be able to say that I have nothing new to say outside India. Like in India, there is something new because our writing is so diverse.
But we've already had Train Spotting.
Yeah, exactly. You have had like, I was like, every book that I read is better than mine. Why would I ever want why would I ever want to like publish this as my first novel? It took a lot of discipline to be able to say like, no, I mean, I'm not like, despite the success, it's not gonna, but in India that time, our writing was very divorced from our realities because everybody was writing about poverty in India and this and that, which was all true. But we were also a young society which was experiencing a lot, and nobody wanted to. Nobody was like, art was not talking about that at all, because I think because of the commerce, like the Indian writing market at that time was very small. People were selling 10,000-12,000 copies, so the market was in the US. Nobody in the US wanted to read about young Indians having fun. They wanted to read about the stereotypes of India. So that's why the commerce led to that kind of writing. And then I just wrote, as I said, for what I thought was my reality, and then it did well. But then I knew that I had nothing new to contribute here. So, but it's fine, right? Like, what's the point in hurrying to become someone you're not?
Yeah, that was smart, because then the yoga of Max's discontent might not have gone where it did if that first book had come out and everyone was so busy comparing it to, I don't know, On the Road, the Motorcycle Diaries. Like, come on.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and sometimes that happens, right? I remember in my first book when the agents and editors in the US started to contact me, they were like, oh, this is the new voice of, I was like, actually, I was like, no, don't confuse it. There's no new voice. There's a new voice of India and the new stream of content. I was like, it's none of that. It's just, I'm just an ordinary guy who doesn't know how to write, who's written patched his first book together. So I was just like, the people like try to hype too much, I think, like as they sell. And so.
But on the flip side of that, on the flip side of that, it's well known that us Western people love to read our poverty porn.
Yes.
And a lot of the books and stories that do become popular about other areas are very one track in the subject. Everyone's miserable, and then they come to the US and they get enlightened, they make money, whatever, yada yada, stereotype. So do you feel like you lost something by having your first international debut novel focus on a non-Indian main character?
Lost some? Actually, no, because the choice of the Indian character was actually not very, like, it wasn't a deliberate choice for a market as such. The choice was to operate as a novice learning yoga. Like, it's almost like if I had chosen an Indian character. So think of a simple concept in the book, like,
well, he's Indian, of course he's gonna learn yoga.
Or a little bit like that, or even like more esoteric concept, like a lot of the book, a little bit of the book is about karma and past lives and stuff. Like, that starts to happen as this odyssey of purification. He starts to get glimpses into his past lives. Right now, if I were to write this as an Indian, it's very matter of fact, because I think we just grew up with this karma, cause and effect. It goes over cycles. But as a Westerner who's suddenly, I guess, getting glimpses of his past lives, it's a very stunning kind of a moment of what exactly is happening. Why is it happening? The questioning is very innocent, I guess, in some way. So I think a lot of the concepts that I was writing about were very seeped into my tradition, but I wanted to write of it from almost like somebody who had no tradition at all of that, and yet those experiences were happening in a very real way. Or even the mystical parts of the yogis and stuff that I talk about in the book.
So it almost allowed you to get outside your personal upbringing and your personal experience.
Right, because a fictive dream then became a fictive dream, because otherwise it was like the author knew so much. I like, not to say I know so much, that sounds very, but like, again, I've experienced so much of that yoga, meditation, spiritual life, karma. I knew so much that I would never be able to create a true fictive dream. There would be too much of my presence in it. So I think the device of a novice was very important. So that was the reason I kind of chose a Western or like a American character who had a Greek upbringing or Bronx projects, because it was really approaching it as a complete novice in a way, and whatever he learns, and the author is not present at all.
So I'm going to ask the totally annoying question that every writer gets asked, when you write a character that is so different from yourself. Did you have to do any sort of research in order to be able to step outside yourself and approach your own personal beliefs from a complete naive point of view?
Yes, and surprisingly,
American Yogis.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one, because in a 300-page novel, or this novel, the second 270 pages, I read like 3 books for it. That was my research. The first 30 pages, I must have read about 120 books. So it's almost like I must have read everything in the world about the Bronx housing projects.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was because when I wrote the first few drafts of the novel, I was just realizing that I didn't know every day of my character's life, because I thought, I guess I just thought that they weren't important to the story I was telling. I was trying to tell a story from age 29 to age 35, like of his life. And age 29 to 35 of his life, I understood because he was a banker in Wall Street who becomes a yogi, and I understood that part very well. But his entire choices in those 6 years were shaped by the first 29, and I truly didn't understand it very viscerally. And the surprising thing is that I don't even talk a minute, or I don't talk much about his, like the story still starts at age 29. So I barely talk about his childhood and all of that stuff. But I had to know every part of his upbringing, his childhood, in order for every reaction is shaped by that. So I think I'm a very big kind of fan of like knowing every day of your character's life, even if that day doesn't get reflected at all. And I think so as a result, I had to really, really understand what 1917 the Bronx was like in a very real way. And even then, if you look at the reviews, which are very good right now, like on Goodreads and stuff, the reviews are very positive, luckily. They all say that they didn't like the first 30 pages.
It's funny. I just literally listened to a review on YouTube and they said the same thing.
Yes.
And I think it is that. But the
I didn't
other
know
thing that was said was that, that the payoff was there. And I think that's something that we read a lot of books that start off with a bang and then they just let us down.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have a book that keeps getting better as you're reading it. There are a few books that I can think of that do that. And I think that I would class your book in that as you're reading it, this character makes choices that you might not necessarily like. And then gradually over time, it sucks you in and you see his growth. And I think that's really important.
Right. And then it shows in a way, because the first, to your point, it's very, I guess it's still, despite all the research, the character is still very theoretical in the beginning. Like it's still a caricature of sorts, I guess. I mean, I hate to say it, my own novel, which isn't released yet, but unfortunately it's true, is that like it's still a caricature versus he doesn't become fully three-dimensional until I understood him three-dimensionally, which happened once he reached India. So I think, despite all your research, you can't completely lift that burden off,
But there's also a plus side of that, because when you're talking about a story about somebody that is going through this sort of spiritual journey to become a real person, having it be that it starts off that this person is more of a caricature and then gradually he becomes more of a real person.
Yes.
It's a nice reflection of the theme of the book,
which is true as well. Yeah. But I do wish but it's surprising. I don't know what I would have done very differently with all my novels. I've had the feeling that I would change this. With this one, I haven't had that feeling in the last year that I've been away from it, which might be a good sign. Or
I think that is a really good sign.
Yeah, for the first time I've had this in this almost 7-8 years of writing and all that stuff. I've never had that feeling that I still know there's some flaws in the beginning. I can't fully identify them, but I don't know what I would do very differently in terms of the choices. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, so I think I had that similar experience. The first 20 pages, I was like, okay, a guy from the Bronx. Yeah. But when it really came alive for me, it had to be when he started walking on his own in the Himalayas. Yeah. And he has to go over the glaciers, and then he meets the 2 motorcycle characters. And one thing that you mentioned earlier was that the main character needs to have a big goal. So one thing I noticed here is he had a big but very unspecific goal.
Yeah.
He just sort of was chasing something that he didn't fully understand.
Yes.
And I was very amused how in the first half of the book, he kept parroting what people had said to him, and then he would say something like, "But I don't know if I've bought it yet."
Yeah.
And was that your experience as well when you went on your sabbatical?
Yes, very much. So I think so many of the things were like I just was very skeptical of a lot of things as well. So I think that skepticism kind of shows in the books. Like for instance, if 5 years ago, and even now, if I talk in this interview, it'll sound funny, but if 4 5 years ago, if people had really talked about like, can a yogi walk on water, or can a man hear your thoughts without you saying them? Like it would have been sounded very like fuzzy duzzy, I don't I don't have an opinion on it. B, I don't, but I was very skeptical of all this stuff. So I think that's why that skepticism is very true in the book. It's very it comes from my own journey in this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now I've started to kind of feel very differently about certain things. Yeah, on the book.
Right? In what ways?
I don't know. I just have believed that. For instance, a small incident, but when I was in the Himalayas in the ashram, I remember one afternoon, which will sound very mystical and kind of like outworldly here, but there was one afternoon when I spent with a yogi who had just come out of a cave after 11 years and had started a school, but not with an intention of like becoming a big educator. He just had this instinct to like teach. So he had started a school, and I remember sitting with him one afternoon, and he just answered my questions without me even speaking a word. And when now I say that, it sounds very this mysticalish thing, but it made sense at that moment, because really words are just a more gross form of thought, and thought is a grosser form of feeling, and so they're like just spectrums in like subtlety, if you will. So if somebody who's living in a very pure, completely purified life, purified area, whose thoughts are very still, for him there is no difference between a spoken word and a feeling that arises in your heart, if you will. I just saw so much of this kind of stuff that I guess like my own rationality just started to break a lot during this sabbatical. I just kind of started to believe in this like very infinite human potential or human power that exists, both physically, emotionally. Like this journey from finite to infinite, I think I understood it in a very visceral way in the sabbatical.
So when you say that, then your thoughts have changed. Do you feel like maybe some of the rigidity of rational thought has come back since you've been back at work and back to point A?
Yes, very much. I think what happens with me is that the tank is full, and then it starts to get depleted when you come back, and then gets depleted further, and then it's time for exactly. And honestly, it happens that way. Come back, I'm quite calm, and then like the world starts to take its pull and all that.
Yeah, I know that feeling quite well. Yeah. The story of my life.
And Max's journey was also very much not planned, the way that your trip wasn't planned. There were many points where he was thinking, I can catch that flight to London, I can still go back to Delhi, but then he meets someone else, and then he meets someone else.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was important, the whole being led a little bit. And then also his automatic resistance to being led, but then letting go of being led. Like I think, all of those were very kind of deliberate choices in some form.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I have a question for you. When you're talking, one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of stories that really are based on a hero's journey is it's easy to fall into the trap of the characters constantly having stuff happen to them, and they can become less active in their own lives.
Yes.
How did you use that hero's journey framework without allowing that to happen to your character?
No, it's a great question. There are subtle choices that have been made throughout for that not to happen, because the whole construct in a hero's journey is that the journey from the ordinary to the extraordinary world happens because of some other force. Like it's not the character's own propulsive force that's leading to the, to the choice to the extraordinary journey. There is some mentor or whatever, something comes in the way, which forces the character almost, and then you lose agency, and when you lose agency, obviously you lose connect with the character, and the whole novel starts to collapse a little bit. So it's almost like the subtle choices that have been made are that the character is always acting, like he's always acting, and like he doesn't control the consequences of the action, but he's acting. So for instance, like a lot of his journey is shaped by him meeting a guy who runs a food cart or whatever, but it's his choice to go to the food cart and offer him a coat or whatever. So it's him acting leading to those moments of coincidence or so his actions lead to that versus he's sitting in his home and somebody coming in and telling him. So he's actively. So I've made it very deliberate almost in every chapter and everything that his action leads to a coincidence to happen, but a coincidence doesn't just happen to him.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I've read very famous novels that are well loved that are based on a hero's journey, and that is the thing that loses me.
Right.
When I have a character that everything is happening to them, but they're not actually making any of their own choices, I become a lot less interested in that character, and that's something that you managed to avoid in your book.
Yes, a little, and you had to do both. You had to have some things happen to him because how else would he end up from Wall Street to the top of the Himalayas? Like, it just doesn't happen automatically, but it's all because of his kind of actions, good or bad, that happen, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I struggle with that a lot.
Yeah. It's like I noticed you created a lot of forks in the roads. There was a lot of moments where you had to decide basically left or right, literally in some places in the novel.
Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And it's his choice that leads to things happening during that path. Yeah.
Well, we're getting really close to time, but I want to ask you two questions. What is your favorite fiction book right now, and what is your favorite nonfiction book right now?
Okay, the nonfiction one is quite easy. It is a book called Mindfulness by Joseph Goldstein. And it's a brilliant book, very underrated because nobody really talks about it, but I think it's really... You read it? Oh, that's incredible. I don't know how, I don't know why it's not as... but I don't know, it's been one of a very transforming books for me because I think the whole... yoga and Buddhist philosophies are 90% the same, and the last 10% is different. And I think I was on the yoga path for a long time and something was missing. And I think this just one book made it very clear to me on what was missing in my, I guess, spiritual journey or whatever, if you will. So that was a beautiful one. So that was my favorite nonfiction book. Fiction right now, it's just very... I enjoyed this book called The Light Between the Oceans or whatever. That was the last book that I really truly got immersed in, and that's because it was. I'm a young father. My kids are very young, and I think it just captured that, that very kind of conflicted emotion. Not conflicted exactly, but you have a lot of tenderness towards your kid, and yet you have a lot individuality still left. And I think it just is very. It's the first book that I've read that's been able to capture that emotion in a non-cliched way. It's not that you have an instant moment of selflessness when you see your baby.
Yeah.
You have a lot of individualism still left, and yet they melt your heart. And I think that contradiction was very well laid out in that book, which I think is beautiful once again, because only fiction can do it.
Yeah, I agree. I need to read that book. Annie's knows that in the Literary Roadhouse, I always appreciate books that approach those topics from directions that are a little uncomfortable. And I know we did read a story about a mother that was having difficulty, and that was something I appreciated was that it was talked about, because those are things that aren't necessarily you're not supposed to say that.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You're supposed to love your baby the minute they come out, give them everything, and be perfectly happy doing it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And people are starting to say that in nonfiction a little bit, but that the way they say that in nonfiction, it's almost like you can sense that the person is trying to
apologize,
build some kind of a platform, or and then or they're just being too dramatic about sharing that part. But I think it's the fiction. The beauty of fiction is that it can share the paradox of the whole emotion in a very, I don't know, so many different paradoxical emotions can be shared. Because you in a three-dimensional character. So I think I like that very much.
Yeah. Also, it gives you distance. So you can approach things if you write a book about racism, people get, defensive before they even start reading the book, and they have their own preconceived notions. But if you're writing a book about aliens that are being segregated from society, you can get those same ideas across in a way that readers are more open to accepting them.
Yes.
And then after the fact, and they're like, oh, now I'm having all these thoughts about the real world. And I think that that's one of the strengths of fiction, is that you're able to approach these big questions in ways that are more accessible.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about before we close this
No,
out?
I think this is wonderful. Thank you for talking. Wonderful chat.
It was absolutely wonderful talking to you. And I'm really stoked that you're going to be coming back. Karan
Yes.
Bajaj, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Hey,
You're going
yeah.
to be back with us in June for the Literary Roadhouse Book Club to discuss Anuradha Roy's Sleeping on Jupiter. If anyone would
Okay.
like more information on Karan and his books and his blog and all the wonderful things that he's doing, please visit his website, karanbajaj.com. That's KaranBajaj.com. He also is at Twitter under the same name. And, this is new for us. We haven't had Literary Roadhouse discussion. This was really prompted because you approached us and you seemed like somebody that we really did want to talk to. And we've decided that this is going to be an irregular series where we bring you interviews from authors and other literary fictions, and we publish them as they come. They will appear in your normal Literary Roadhouse feed, and we hope that you enjoy them. If you have any more comments or if anyone listening would have any suggestions for us, please visit the website at literaryroadhouse.com and make sure that you leave an iTunes review for all of our wonderful shows.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great discussion.
Ciao.
Yeah, same here. Bye-bye.
That was great, guys. That was really awesome.
Oh, wonderful.
Karan,
Thank you.
were
Thank you
a
for this
wonderful,
question.
gracious